The death of a game video. Do you know what I'm talking about? I still haven't watched it yet. Cause like, I was like, oh, I can make a video on this. And I'm like, yeah, when am I gonna get the time? You know? Yeah. And I'm just sat here not even watching it. And the thing is, this game, like I've watched a lot of these videos before. And I watched the one on Paladins a couple weeks back and it was okay. There's a bit of rehashing, is there? Is there too much rehashing? No, I'm not clicking on that. I ain't getting baited. Nuh-uh. No bait, no sorry. This person is
over 100 gods and deities from 12 plus different pantheons,
covered
and practically the only third-person MOBA, or
like almost every game from Hi-Rez,
which launched back in 2014, was developed by beloved developer, hated executive suite, Hi-Rez. While SMITE always existed, relatively speaking, in the shadow of the titans in its field, pun intended, the top-down MOBAs, if you will, League and Dota respectively, it technically has lasted longer than any other MOBA, and arguably has had more success than the other ones.
Oh my god, this looks so pixelated.
That makes SMITE one of the few non-big name MOBAs that found success, which makes it an interesting story. Well, on top of this being another Hi-Rez video, let's be honest, they are repeat offenders with Global Agenda, Rogue Company, Paladins just recently, and now SMITE. And they are quite popular on the series for
it won't happen to SMITE.
SMITE's success, though, was obtained against the odds, and in spite of so many of the things working against the game and, well, company. But sadly, because SMITE is being talked about in the series for this episode, you know it's been either moved to maintenance mode or is soon to be facing the chopping block, which the former just recently happened as of a month ago of the video launch in 2025. Worse, for SMITE 1 at least, a sequel was released, which effectively means that the development team has fully moved on.
Okay, so he mentions a sequel pretty early on.
Know that, but let me cook. Yes, chef. It's a series where you choose a dead or dying gamer company and try to find the largest contributing factors to its death, failure, or shifting to the bench by utilizing a timeline of events where we pick up various clues
this guy finding this
all
stuff?
culminating in a final deduction. Every detective's favorite moment where we crack the case. If you stay tuned to the very end, you can get a hint on what the next case is going to be about too.
Dude, we used to get videos like this for every god release.
Recently put into maintenance mode, so this case is quite fresh. So choose your god from 130 of them, I might add, and choose your lane, and let's slay the enemy titan. The story begins, well, ironically, the story begins pretty much the same as the Paladin story does, but we won't spend too much time talking about that or Overwatch.
This is Paladins, right?
The other episode did.
Is that what Georgia Films is?
But
I
don't
know what Georgia Films is. No, I think. I don't know what that is actually.
Located in Georgia,
I never looked it up. I don't know if it's just because they're based in Georgia.
Despite their negative reputation,
and maybe that's just like a
more positive reputation of being known as being a developer who could make fun games, just not being able to manage them very well. Following the mishandling and slowing down of their hit Global Agenda, a sci-fi MMORPG FPS.
See, this I never seen and never played.
And begin working on a project that would go by the name of Aurum. What would start as a sci-fi project to pay homage to Global Agenda, which is one of my favorite games I might add, would eventually become fantasy. And during this time, Project Aurum would eventually fork off into two different projects, following different trends of the time. And yes, that's also true about Paladins, because Team Fortress 2 came way before Overwatch or Paladins. I mean, come on guys. The second project
no one ever talks about Team Fortress.
This video, SMITE, featuring gods and deities from multiple different pantheons such as the Arthurian legends, Babylonian, Celtic, and more. Smite would mimic the classic MOBA gameplay style with its main
This was
mode,
such a good
Conquest,
video.
with 3
With the
lanes
knee.
and,
And she had like
5 versus 5,
eyeliner down to here.
holding creeps, and of course towers and a titan that must be defeated to win. The
I
main
do
differences with
miss.
Smite being, of course, the third-person camera and gameplay, and the fact that it utilized well-known characters of history and legend. The third-person gameplay would allow for near
this.
shooter-like combat for certain characters.
Oh my god, look at
and
this Heba!
action combat for just about everybody else. This introduced a whole
Yo, was
new
that
potential
Odin?
audience who was more familiar with this type of combat and approach. Something I need to acknowledge, and this is where I will admit a L from a previous video, in fact just the recent Paladins one.
This is just a trip down memory lane.
I really hope you guys land on your feet.
Yeah,
by the
we're
way, but I
reacting
neglected to
today.
mention
This
that
is our
Paladins was
podcast.
made using UE3, aka Unreal Engine 3. That's because I was going to mention it in this video, because Smite, a game set to be playable in just a few years at the time of the timeline, was being built with an engine that was already 8 years old. In their defense, UE4 wouldn't launch fully until 2014, though it was already accessible by a couple developers in early access from
transition
2012.
phase,
Closed
huh?
beta for Smite would commence May 2012, and you would need a key to access it. Or if you played the previous high-res games, you were invited, because I'm pretty sure I got an invitation from playing Tribes. Smite during the closed beta days, though, was a different beast, naturally.
I
It had a
also
fraction
played
of the gods in
Tribes.
the game, of course, accessible, but it featured largely more.
You could probably find a
2-1-2
YouTube video that got
map
you
play,
into
which was kind of
Smite.
more common in MOBAs at
I
the
got to
time due
Smite
the
from a
jungle
random
difficulty
Twitch
and
streamer.
the popularity of it, and I can.
Like,
speak
it
to
was
that
so,
'cause
so
and the
random.
jungle wasn't really featured in the lane either. Now, I was personally interested in Smite simply due to the usage of Greek, though more so the Roman styling of the gods, which I was obsessed with as a child, reading Edith Hamilton's mythology in 4th grade. But Smite for 2012 was looking revolutionary, me as a fan of gods or not. You have to think. Paragon, the other well-known but short-lived third-person MOBA, came out in like 2016. That was a whole 4 years later. There wasn't really anything like it, unlike
There
what
was
Paladins
not.
would become in many other high-res projects. Smite
And
was
anyone who
unique.
played
The
League of
third-person
Legends hated the
angle was
top-down
something
thing.
new
This
and
was so much
exciting,
better.
and it wasn't just a gimmick, especially after Paladins removed their third-person mode. Open beta for Smite would take place in January of 2013 and would be most people's first time playing the game. And during this time, Hi-Rez would sell founder packs, granting player access to the current
Yeah, I
crop of
remember
gods,
PewDiePie had
including
a-
future gods in the
like
process,
a
all priced
player
at
icon.
around $40 or less.
That was all he
And this
had.
is a great deal, and it's something that other games
But I
take
never actually saw
inspiration
his
from
video,
still
whatever
today.
the hell he did with
Quietly
the
in the
game.
fall of 2013, Smite would enter a deal
I just knew
with
there
the
was a thing
devil.
you could
Just
get.
kidding. It's just Tencent. But Tencent was famous for publishing and then taking over Riot Games and Epic Games, just about, and would now be publishing another MOBA, this time a third-person one and only in China. This might seem weird to some. Why would they be competing with themselves? But in reality, it's genius because the Chinese Tencent was cornering the entirety of the MOBA market, except Dota
I heard
at this
that
point,
Tencent
making
had
their
a
grasp
play.
pretty much inescapable. Smite would launch on Windows March 25th, 2014.
I had
and
a play
received
in
quite
Smite not
positive
blowing
reviews
up.
from even major review outlets. Managing to score an 80 out of 100 from 21 different major critics on aggregate review website Metacritic.
Yeah.
For example, Leah B.
was
Jackson
part
of
of the
IGN
reason
gave
why
the game
Smite
an
didn't blow
8.5 out of 10 and stated that its unique camera angle alone was enough to set the game apart. And yet, there was even more to enjoy and appreciate, such as the variety and look of the gods and the polish of the map. Season 1 for Smite would start May 2014 and would feature the ranked mode for the game, which would feature a true skill style system instead of your typical win-loss system.
For Arena?
Conquest was the game's standard mode, common in most MOBAs. but
Oh, I
something
never got to
unique
play
in
Arena
Smite,
ranked.
and
I never got to
arguably one of
level
their coolest
30, and then they
aspects
took it
was that
away.
Besides the setting and characters, was that the fact that the game actually had some pretty good side modes, providing alternate play to the 5 vs 5 mode, Conquest. Joust, for example, was a fan favorite 3 vs 3 map that focused more on the action with only one lane and would be introduced during this time. Arguably, the side modes in Smite are more famous than the main mode, partly due to their unique gameplay offered by comparison, and other in part due to them being largely
Not
unique to
in
Smite, and not a
OC.
copy from some other game or the parent genre. A free-to-play game, Smite, won, a few months after its launch would already claim 4 million players. Now, this wasn't their active player base, but it was still impressive. Smite would even team up with Level Up Games in Latin America
sure.
and would help increase that number, however. Smite's first World Championship would take place in 2015 in the spring and would feature a whopping $2.6 million in prize pool. While I would normally critique this because it's like, wow, that's a crap ton of money for a game that doesn't even have a scene yet, as being
They
early
did
to a
like
scene before
doing
it even
that.
takes place and forms organically is also not a very good thing, which is still true, but at the very least, the pool was largely obtained through the purchase of an Odyssey pack, sort of like the Compendium and Dota. This would allow for the sales to contribute to the prize pool, which is why it was so significant already. There's an argument to be made. If
Oh my god,
Smite
screen
could succeed
tearing.
as an esport, they would be able to attract more players to their game
Oh
and
no,
thus
it's
more
10
revenue.
years
However,
ago.
if they spent too much time, money, and resources on a scene that nobody watched or cared about, it could all be for naught. Season 2 would launch
feel like it
February
started off
2015,
strong.
introducing a new Conquest map. A much sexier one, I might add, and even then, a few more gods to release over the course of the season, which would become pretty typical with Smite going on even to current day. Contrast this to Heroes of the Storm, and Smite released far more characters more consistently. Smite's brother, Paladins, would launch August 2015, and I only mention it because Hi-Rez wasn't a big company, and they were having to split their resources to chase more trends. Or in Paladins' case, at least initially, try their own unique attempts at a genre, kind of like with Smite. But Hi-Rez never really seemed to scale up to expectations, and remained a rather small company. Like, sure, saying Hi-Rez has like 450 people working at the company, which probably a lot less now after layoffs multiple times, sounds like a crap ton.
Yeah,
but
they have
remember,
like so
they
many
have,
people
like
working
6
now.
or 7 games that they're working on. So in reality, does Smite actually have hundreds of developers working on it? Probably nowhere
Doesn't
close.
450
Smite would
people
arrive
sound
on
like a
Xbox in the
lot?
fall of 2015. And this was actually one of the geniuses of Smite, in my opinion. It was one of the first MOBAs to come to console, literally, and it eventually became one of the most dominant ones there too. I mean, I know so many gamers who played Smite on console first before ever playing another MOBA, like my cousin Ty. So it really was an effective
I don't know, that's
gateway
the
drug
thing.
for so many players tapping into an all-new audience. I mean, Hi-Rez had no competition on console. Hi-Rez would launch Smite 1 on Steam September 2015, and at this point, we can track their population data, where they would hit an impressive 19,957 peak players, which wasn't bad for a little brother MOBA. Smite developing a presence
Only
on Steam was
19,000?
crucial, because not only did it have no competition there besides Dota
And
2,
people thought we
though,
were
to
over.
be clear, that's not really competition because it was orders of magnitude bigger. Like Smite boasts like 20k players, Dota had closer to 1 million. But anyway, Season 3 would follow shortly after, introducing a new Joust map and a slew of new gods.
What are these
Smite would
clips?
keep introducing new
These
gods
clips do
every
not
year,
reflect what
ranging
it's
from
saying
new
right now.
pantheons
This
and
is
new,
so
such
old,
as
oh my
Hindu
god.
gods and even like the old gods.
This is
The
what
Hindu
Smite
gods
looked like the
actually
first
developed
time I
a lot of
played it.
controversy, though, due to how they were introduced, such as Shiva
This,
being portrayed
Kali,
in a
this
particular way.
Kali.
But also
Yeah,
due to
I played that
Hindu
arena
believing that they
100%.
didn't really respect their gods or customs. And I mean, they have a point, sort of. I don't think Hi-Rez's focus was to put a ton of time into that, like Civilization style, though maybe they could have, and it could have given the game a little bit more story, something like League of Legends has, but they weren't really sensitive to a bunch of different cultures with a bunch of different sacred things and gods. But
These
that
were
wasn't
cool.
really the point of Smite. It was more about being a crossover
like so
god
much
that featured
personality in
different
this game.
gods, and that was kind of novel. I don't think it was meant to be a deep lore dive, though maybe that could have helped the game have a little bit more longevity or a bigger audience.
Nah, it actually wouldn't.
While Season 4 was starting for Smite, February 2017, the game was celebrating 20 million players as a milestone. Smite was slowly climbing to a
The amount of times that Smite has come out with like some kind of, they used to have like these lore videos whenever they brought out a new god, and then they would have like, you had a lore section where you can read all their stuff, but like Iris has said multiple times, like no one looks at that stuff. And they've even made comics, like they've written stories of characters in the game, that kind of stuff, but that stuff never really amounted to anything in the long run. Like they didn't see any kind of return, so they never invested in it. So I don't think that's like, no one actually cares about lore when they're playing a MOBA.
major multiplayer title.
Maybe if
after
they had a
becoming
TV
a
show.
cult hit. Another year and another season of updates
Like
and new
Arcane,
gods
but
would come.
even
This
like
time a new
Arcane
conquest
isn't
map
really
to spice
benefiting
things up and
League
keep
of
things fresh.
Legends.
But really, compared to when Smite was first playable, the game was in a much improved state, and I can even attest to this personally. Rock Paper Shotgun picked up the game at the time and had some improved impressions where they spoke about this. I would even argue that the new design changes and improvements, the game was almost like unrecognizable in some ways, and largely in positive ways too.
It is crazy how
Hi-Rez, in
it's
a attempt to
the same
consolidate their
engine
projects, now
and
working
it
on
looks
like 3 to 4 plus
insanely
of them,
different
at
over
the
the
same
years.
time would split into multiple studios, with Titan Forge Games taking over the reins on Smite. Hi-Rez wasn't just a private studio trying to make a living. They were trying to expand and get into like the hundreds of employees and become a major
feel like
player.
they
were making
expanded
all kinds
at
of
a bad
games and
time.
attempts at such.
A lot of
Mobile
people play
games,
League
spin-off
after
games,
playing.
previous games, you name it. And acting,
Dude,
not like a corporate studio.
I always wanted to play Smite Rivals. This here, this Clash of Clans clone. was waiting for this. They came out with a Loki skin that was based on this game. We never got to play it because I think they got hit with DMCA or something. I think something happened that their game looked too similar to Clash of Clans, and then they had to stop making it. Yeah. And I so wanted this game. I was looking forward to this game. Unlucky. Unlucky. This...
Mobile games, spin-off games of previous games, you name it, and acting a lot
SMITE
like a corporate
rival was
studio.
unfortunate.
Hell, during this time, they even had begun development on a title that would become known as Divine Knockout.
This was
supposed
fun!
to be like a third-person Smash Brothers, but it should be noted after launching later on, Divine
really
Knockout would
flopped.
flop so hard that none of you have
really
even heard
flopped.
of it.
I don't even
The
know
amount of money and
why.
resources being wasted chasing these new trends
It's crazy
instead of
because it's
buckling
like,
down on
these
already
games were
successful games
good,
like
but
SMITE was shocking. I mean, in
I don't know if it's just lack of
2018,
marketing or
Hi-Rez still
however,
seemingly had no
it was a
plans to
fun
transition
game.
to the new Unreal Engine, which was UE4 at the time, which had
still
already
get
been out
it.
for 4 years. Now, in the DOAG series, I'm
It
always
really shows, they certainly don't market, it really shows it doesn't matter how good of a product you have. If you don't show it to the right audience, then no one knows it's there. I don't...
UE3 engine.
Like, no one's
And in
gonna play it if
SMITE,
they
it's
don't
no
know
different.
about it.
It adds an insane amount of delay and clunkiness to the game that
Oh,
kept me
is this
away
lag?
from the
What the
game,
hell
to
is
be
this?
honest. And it's something that I've always felt and despised at the same time. However,
This is like
swapping
the
engines
OC
isn't just
stutter.
this magical solution you can do overnight, and just by the press of a button. But when most of the negative criticism that you're getting about the game is concerning the engine, it seemed like a no-brainer to start making a transition at some point. I mean, League of Legends never stayed the same. It changed a ton graphically, gameplay-wise, and even with its engine. Putting it off just didn't really seem like a good solution.
Does League own
because
its
then
own
you're not
engine?
really
Probably.
competitive anymore. That could be felt after Paragon came out and felt like it was a completely different world of a game. And Paragon was built with UE4, by the way. Season 6 for SMITE would take place in February of 2019. It would not only introduce the Time Wizard Merlin, it would trigger the 30 million player mark for SMITE and also, according to reports, eclipse $300 million in revenue generated. Now, this is a huge number, especially for a smaller developer, but this was 1/5 of what League of Legends was making, which wasn't so bad, but that was 1/5 of what LOL was making in a single year, meaning that that number for SMITE was probably up to that point. LOL was making way more than
League is a
every
really
single
big
year.
company.
The point being
Like,
that
Riot
not
is a
that SMITE
big,
sucks
big
because
company.
the other game made more money, but that it was just a lot smaller compared to League of Legends and Dota 2. And when you're constantly making new games and diverting resources, it's even harder to be
Oh,
competitive
look at this
with
graph.
the
Hang on, I need to look at this graph. What is SMITE Blitz? Hand in the Gods? SMITE Tactics? Also a good game. I don't know what happened. Because that was before Auto Chess or whatever kind of blew up. That was before that. And for some reason they killed it. I don't know. Yeah, this is a video you linked when you were away.
Titan in your field. Well, unless
But
you're
also,
not
I don't
really
think that game
interested
had a
in
big
being
big,
competitive, but just
developing
collecting
team.
their runoff, which kind of seems to be Hi-Rez's MO more so. And to be clear, I'm speaking more of the executives and those at the top. At this point, many of the OG devs started departing the company, such as Hi-Rez's Drybear, known for his champion designs and
He was also on Love is
personality.
Blind.
But the executives at Hi-Rez, like Stuart Chisholm, the new CEO who celebrates being a
He doesn't
game
have
as
to
a
confront
servicer
you with
for
his
some
failures.
reason, and the two infamous founders, Hi-Rez Goran and Hi-Rez Todd, were still there, and still making the same major decisions and acting the same exact way. They still were likely hamstringing SMITE and their team from ever really reaching anything more than the ceiling that was just being placed on them kind of arbitrarily. Examples of this are seen with the numerous controversial departures of high-profile content creators as well as the developers, such as the ones that we already mentioned, but
That's a
more
JOUST
like
video.
Punk Duck, Double J, and even DM Brandon. Though
Why are we
that last
mentioning
one was
DM
a
Brandon?
much-needed departure, let's be honest.
Okay.
Weird story, but
Why
DM
not?
Brandon actually played on my LAN team, as you can see from this footage, for early Overwatch. Though in my defense, he was a twat then, and avoided any conversation with me besides just talking about how large I was, and was randomly
Should be a
put on my
non-talking
team
point.
due to last-minute changes anyway. Oh, and we won the tournament. But anyway, Hi-Rez being late on payments, being against free speech reportedly about their game, and making puzzling decisions would lead to many of the content creators departing, further lowering the
Yeah.
overall view
Like
and player
leaving
count in
OCE,
SMITE and the
killing
popularity, with
OCE.
all the biggest content creators now moving to
Ignoring
Dota 2 or League of
OCE.
Legends instead. But worse, remember
Yeah, I
Mixer?
never played
Yeah,
that.
I know. Nobody really does. But anyway, we covered it on the Death of a Game series, and it was a streaming platform that had crazy tech and had a bunch of money thrown at it, but it fizzled out in a jiffy, like a real fast jiffy.
Why are we talking
like
about Mixer?
Jiffy. Well, Hi-Rez would enter a deal with Mixer, which would be shut down within just 2
We
years.
did? They
this
did?
decision severely-
Oh, shit, they did. Holy shit. So they had, oh my god, how did I forget about this? Hi-Rez had exclusivity with Mixer. That's crazy. I forgot about that. And you could only watch esports on Mixer. I forgot.
Hurt both the competitive scene for Smite, which was actually
They got so much money from Microsoft. It
which was
probably
the general
wouldn't
popularity
have
and marketing for
helped the
Smite as a whole,
marketing
since most of the
component.
content was on Mixer, a subpar
Oh, that's
platform by comparison to
crazy.
Twitch in terms of reach and more. My guess is that Hi-Rez was either given a check or wanted
It had to be a
leverage the new
really
platform
crazy
to
check.
inflate their numbers to then get a check so they could sell the rights for SPL.
You know when
aka
Smite
the
started to
Pro
go
League of
down? When they
Smite,
took
to
it off
someone like YouTube or Twitch. But it was
the
a gamble,
Switch.
and it didn't really work. And it was an unneeded gamble
That was
for a
it.
smaller fish trying to compete with sharks. Following the pandemic,
Yeah,
and subsequent world
I don't
shutdown would
know.
be another season for Smite. This time, season
It was one of those
7.
things, like I
During
quit
the pandemic,
Smite
would leverage
in
people being stuck at
2018,
home
right? And I think it was a
actually increase in
year
player
or so
count,
that I
reaching
didn't
even higher
play.
numbers than they started with. This
But
would be
I
bolstered by a
still
slew of new
paid
crossover
attention to what
skins
they were
in Smite,
doing.
featuring the Avatar cast with Aang, Zuko, and Korra. These skins are a bit controversial because they're not actually like gods, and in a sense they kind of remove any of the style that the game has, especially like the more wacky skins in the game. I mean, Agni can
Oh, but
literally
they do
play
that
as a
more
pimp
now.
who says, "Make it rain, make it rain, make it rain." And I love
They're
this.
never
I
bringing
think
that
it
skin
actually
back
breaks up
out
the
of
monotony and the tension that, exists in these competitive multiplayer games. But the obsession with crossover games and worlds more so comes from the success of games like Fortnite. Now, everyone was doing crossovers, including Smite. But to be fair, it seemed to pay off players-wise, with population jumping up
These
to
were pretty good.
31,000 players peak by the beginning of 2021. Smite would start facing its largest downtrend yet, starting in the fall of 2022.
Yeah, that's because the
culprit of this
pandemic
largely being the age of the game.
ended.
It already was 8 years old. Its clunky engine, which was already older than some of the players playing the game, but also due to the slew of changes that were implemented that the fans just weren't enjoying. Things get worse and more complicated when you have a large
Yeah, the
number of
crossover
players
skins
not
were
playing
good.
Conquest, but you're balancing only for
And if Smite 2
Conquest.
survives,
Not
I'll get
just
back to
Conquest,
it.
but the SPL or the Smite Pro
Engine
League.
isn't
Balancing
clunky.
around
I
your top
don't
players is
think.
commonplace, but when the design changes aren't appealing to the large number
Yeah,
of
but the
players,
problem was, okay, I guess it wasn't the engine necessarily, it was the way the game was built, right? And clearly the dev team was struggling on updating and doing anything with the game itself.
it's just a recipe for disaster.
It definitely
Season
ran
10,
better,
as
that's for
reported by
sure.
the fans, would introduce multiple changes back to back that would lead to a stale meta, and even in some cases just subpar gameplay.
Yeah, they
But things
made
would start
it
rebounding.
like,
A year
they
later,
didn't make
with
it
a
properly.
series of
They didn't make
mini-seasonal
it with
updates in
future in
2023,
mind.
introducing yet more gods and a new map. Gods had now ballooned up to an impressive over 100, and a problem
Yeah, it's
started
important to
rear its
future-proof
ugly
your
head. One
work,
that
and they
Dark
didn't do
Ages of
that.
Camelot, an old-school virtual world pioneer we have covered before, knew quite well crowd control, or CC.
Because
it's
it's always been a company that chased trends, so they never really consider the fact that Smite could be one of those that
fighting and CC.
would
With so many characters being
be a
built around
mainstay
this and
for so
having
long.
CC themselves, one has to
Was
wonder
it
if
like,
was
I guess if you were
because
to
of
think
the
about
limit
it,
of the
it does
game
seem a
engine that they
bit
would focus
gimmicky.
more so on CC than other mechanics, perhaps just the style that Smite was kind of going for. But it was presenting problems, especially for the less experienced players who would find a tough game to break into. Smite might be hand-waved by MOBA players who never played it and only played the top-down gargantuan MOBAs, but Smite is a really hard game. I can speak from personal experience and honestly just watch these
Is
top
it?
plays on screen. The level of skill to pull off some
It's
of these
hard to
plays
tell when you've
is
played
up
for
there,
so long.
if not
And the thing
higher
is,
than
so
any
many
of the top
players of
MOBAs.
Smite have been playing since beta, right? Like you hear that so much, like, oh, I've been playing since beta.
However, this difficulty increase of a sort kind of made
Smite
a
ain't
little
gimmicky.
less
I'm saying the
approachable,
original
as it
premise
had a
sounds
higher skill
gimmicky.
cap now, which made
So
the
they
game
probably
harder to
thought they were
play.
just chasing a
I think
trend.
Hi-Rez could have combated this with some more noob-friendly characters and mechanics, but with their audience being smaller already, they likely focused on just focusing on their own audience versus a new one. More restructuring would happen at Hi-Rez, and it seems like the signs were pointing to yet more shuffling behind the scenes. Hi-Rez at this point had all of their projects slowing down, with a couple just about dead or dead entirely.
I don't know why they made Rogue Company, man.
Paladins, and more so now SMITE
Rogue Company
to stay
felt like
afloat
such a
as
waste of
company going forward.
resources.
Hi-Rez, in a decision to keep their, although successful, especially given the circumstances, faltering competitive scene afloat, would transition the SPL to franchising. And some esports,
Realm
this is
Royale
either a
was
positive or meant to be
big
seen
loss
as a
as
positive,
well.
I might say. But with SPL, the organizations and thus the league itself was now actually being owned by Hi-Rez themselves. They were the ones making the teams, hosting the tournaments, and designing the game, because the other pro teams had exited because it just wasn't profitable for them to remain in a scene that had such few viewers. It was just a strange situation, though. But I can't hate it because the pro scene of the game was able to
I don't know if
stay
this
alive
ever been
during
done
this
with
time,
another
where
game.
players could still make money from appearances and wins. Smite's competitive scene, given the amount of players who played it and were interested in watching it, was a massive success for Smite, and this was confirmed by the executives at Hi-Rez themselves. While it's foolish to think that if you blow that up, it just gets bigger and better in a linear sense, there really is a thought of, what if the comp scene in Smite, to go alongside the what ifs alongside Smite itself, what if Smite had a different developer?
The thing is, the Hi-Rez takeover for SBL wasn't really exciting. Like, there was a lot less identity, I think, for the players and the teams. Like, it is absolutely when I lost track of who was on what team and what was going on. I had no idea what was happening anymore. Because the names that they were given, they weren't like, you know, Luminosity or Rivals. Like, they weren't the names you're so used to seeing. Like, because I do feel like, in theory, it sounds nice. But then the other problem was, you had to move to Georgia. You had to move to Hi-Rez Studios to play. And, like, that bit sucks. That made it so a lot of people can't play in the SBL.
More support, and simply
Plus,
speaking,
our region's
more
success in
eyes.
Paladins was a
Many,
major factor in them
myself
staying
included,
active
feel
in
that
the
he would have
esports
been
for
given an
OC
even more
and
fair
Smite.
shake
That
by the
was
wider
true,
gaming
yeah.
population, and potentially become more of a mainstream hit. UE4 had come
Paladins
and
did
gone,
keep
and
them in
UE5,
OC
the
for a
new
bit
big
longer.
Sexy engine for UE had been around
With
for already
Smite.
2 years by 2024. To put this into context,
Yeah,
Smite,
it
a
just
game
made
from
it so hard to
2014,
actually
was
care
using
about
an
the
engine 10 years older
teams that were
now at this
playing.
point was 20 years older. An engine overhaul or shift was inevitable, but many players would be betrayed by what
is
came
this?
next and
Is
how it
this
was
so
implemented.
old? I've never seen this.
Hi-Rez would announce Smite 2 January 2024, which reportedly had started in development about a year prior.
Yeah,
While
dude, I
things
was
were
so excited for
initially
Smite 2.
uncertain about what it would mean for Smite.
I
One,
was
it wasn't hard to imagine
whispering
that now
Smite
the
2 to
focus was
everyone.
being
I'm
shifted
like,
largely to
Smite 2 is going to
2.
be a thing.
Smite 1 just
It's
celebrated
the only
its
way they
11th
can save the
year,
game.
with another Conquest map now reaching over 125 plus gods. The game had already been out for 10 years. That's a long, successful run. A shift was bound to happen, but people's issues came from how Hi-Rez would execute things ultimately. I mean, what a surprise, right? Smite
Don't
2,
agree with
earlier than
them.
anyone would imagine, would rush or like sprint, more like to an early access launch or alpha, whatever you want to call it, August 2024. Not only was the game early, based on people's expectations of the timeline of things, worse, people
Smite 2 did not have very good gods in it. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you there. I was so mad that Cernados was in the initial lineup of Smite 2.
weren't really impressed by
No,
what
it
they were
was there was
experiencing
so
yet.
many gods.
While I
It's
think
like,
a lot of that is off base personally, because I think that the game behind all of that drama is not that bad, I do think that part of it is based on the dislike of the execution of the sequel itself. Smite 2 would require veterans of Smite 1 previous Founders Pack or not to purchase a new God Pack to earn the gods now in Smite 2 through progression as typical. This would anger many fans as they felt like their skins and gods should cross over. While I personally don't think you should have this expectation of a sequel 10 years later, remember
no, I don't think. I could understand the disappointment,
Smite 2 wasn't a
but
complete
I
game
think
yet.
it was
It
right
featured
to
less
be
than half of
mad.
the original God cast and the game, while having massive improvements because of the
And
engine and gameplay.
the
wasn't so
Founders
obviously
Pack
an upgrade. Like, sure,
is
the
like-
graphics are improved, but overall the graphics.
Like, they did a terrible job at marketing it. The Founders Pack was really trying to bring in the core player base of Smite 1 to help them build Smite 2. They were like, okay, we need people to play Smite 2. We only really want people who've been playing Smite 1 this whole time and know what the game is, right? They weren't trying to soft launch it off alpha. This founders pack was overvalued. I don't think so. Because here's the thing. I think it's just it's a bit of it's an old school. The founders pack was an old school pricing mechanic, because they used to do founders packs for other games years ago all the time, and it would be like that. It would be like, okay, like, you know, base one would always be $30 and it gives you access and maybe you get one cool thing. And then it was always like, you're not actually getting anything by paying more, it's you really showing support, right? I don't think they priced it that high.
Feel a bit more generic. I say it wasn't so obvious because
it's like, if you just want to access to the game, it's $30.
Massive change and upgrade. That's just not debatable. But not all players can interpret that or see that to the same degree.
But also,
if they don't play the game.
You don't have to play the alpha. You can wait.
I mean, SMITE 2 was
till it's
announced
free
and
to
launched
play
the same year. Whether Hi-Rez was calling
and then not only that, they still had keys that you could buy. They still had keys that you can get from like their Twitch chat. I remember there was a way to get the keys anyway and play the game for free. So it's not like you had to buy to play it. I don't know, man. You can't use them because you're not buying the new currency. I got a whole bunch of diamonds and I don't know why anymore. Like, you get so many diamonds for playing the game. It's crazy how many you get. But I know what you mean, Kit. You need to actually buy the new currency in order to use the gems. But there are definitely anything legacy. So if they bring out old school skins, anything that's not cross gens, anything that's an old school skin, you can buy 100% with legacy gems. So any skins from SMITE 1 that goes into the game,
paid launch, meaning people could spend money.
And you can buy with the legacy
gems. There was
gems.
no time to hype the game up. And all that hype quickly evaporated when Hi-Rez would put out a schedule for the upcoming gods, where they would start promising a god every week and a new god for SMITE 2 uniquely every month. They would fail to deliver on their promise of the schedule ultimately and quite quickly, angering their fanbase more than had they just not promised it in the first place. The worst part, at least to me personally,
what do you mean? This is because
they
like
actually a decent game. And I've played it.
Everyone got fired.
Engine upgrades and overhaul, but the SMITE team has actually managed to take previously boring and buggy gods that were really uninspired, just because of largely the engine in my opinion, and actually make them fun and effective. This was impressive as hell to me. But with such a poor reputation staining the developers, I feel like he kind of just
glossed over the whole 1 week a god thing.
Things aren't looking good for
one god
2.
a week thing.
That means that things aren't looking good for SMITE 1 either. Their fates are always going to be tied together. After quietly sunsetting the Nintendo Switch version in February 2025, likely due to the clunkiness of the game not fitting the platform well, which was kind of known for having seamless,
I mean, no one was playing it.
2
That's why they took it off.
Half of the original Godcast.
No one was playing it on the Switch.
As an engine upgrade, which League of Legends got multiple times without having to charge for the same characters again. But again, I can't believe I'm defending Hi-Rez. The UE3 shift to UE5 was massive. It's just the way that it was handled was...
This person did not just say Ares is fun to me.
Really bad. And I think that Hi-Rez just waited as long as humanly possible to do and initiate the shift, which was contributing to their issues. And well, their lack of ability to have open and honest dialogue about it didn't help things either. This is all
you know what I think happened? Because he's like, oh, they just delayed it for too long. Do you know what happened? It was always one of those things where like, do we just wait out for SMITE to die? Because like, it's a lot of work to switch over to SMITE 2. Like, that's the whole rebuilding of the whole game. So they probably didn't want to put resources into that. They were probably waiting for SMITE to die, and then we're hoping one of these new projects that they worked on, like Realm Royale or Paladins or that Rogue Company game, they were probably hoping one of those would take off and sustain the company. And then they were hoping that SMITE would just die and they could move on. But instead, those games died, SMITE kept going, and they were just like, well, like, it was like the end of the rope. They were like, we just need to make SMITE 2.
Their failures surrounding the game.
I think they just like didn't expect it to keep going.
Leaving their biggest breadwinner, SMITE 1, to kind of flounder. This would all culminate in a critical negative moment in the history of both SMITEs. Shocking just about everyone, including their own staff. Hi-Rez would announce laying off 70+ employees and shifting all of their development focus to SMITE 2 going forward. This would mean that
69
Smite 1,
employees,
alongside a few
actually.
other high-res titles, would now be
Well,
put
maybe
into
not, but-
maintenance mode with no new content on the horizon. The bad decisions of high-res had finally come home to roost, or the chickens came home to roost. Or
Yeah, I
whatever.
truly
The sad
think
part
these
being
other
high-res
games that they came
executives
out
were
with,
deleting
they
their
wanted...
social media and avoiding the criticism, meanwhile firing 70 employees during the process. That's because the decision of a few can hurt many,
wanted to take
including the
over.
players and the developers behind the game.
I never
Smite
ended
1
up
put
playing
into
Rogue
maintenance mode in
Company.
Smite
I
2,
think it was
with
one
its
of those
rocky
things where it's
start hoping to
too
avoid an early
generic.
feature on the series. The timeline has terminated, and the music is playing, which means we have solved the case or obtained enough clues so we can now solve the case during
let's see
our
what
final
he
deduction.
says.
For those who missed the clues along the way, why did Smite 1 get placed into maintenance mode? And why did Smite 1 fail to reach the heights it could very well have? Well, Smite 2 launched, and the focus was shifted ultimately. The high-res effect, which most of you know at this point, but if you don't, go watch the previous episodes. The game had like a 10+ year old
I don't think,
engine
like,
with-
Smite 1 didn't die because of the high-res effect in this case. Like, they were always going to sunset the game. They did essentially lie to you when they said they were going to keep updating the game. I don't think that was their true intention. I think they just needed people to not get angry.
3. High-res fumbled the SPL and
They
their
released a
stream
character that
items.
has flying
Kind
bullets
of
as
an
a passive
extension,
in UN as
high-res
well.
decision-making, and time. Now, time, we always say on the series Detectives, comes for all of us at different times. But I also wanted to mention, because I wanted people to know that with this video, my intention was to actually highlight how successful Smite was, sort of, in spite of everything around it, really. The Death of a Game series isn't always about failures. Sometimes we cover titles that didn't quite make it to the heights that they could have, and Smite really qualifies for that. It was a MOBA that made alternate game modes that were loved and enjoyed, and it became the de facto and only remaining third-person MOBA. It also featured, in arguably the biggest form yet, the most complete roster of gods from different cultures in a multiplayer game ever. Smite was pioneering in many ways, and shattered a lot of expectations. It also brought with it a whole new generation of gamers to the MOBA genre. I know dozens of players.
I think that's MOBA genres.
Dozens
Dozens.
of us who discovered Smite and used it as a gateway drug to become longtime MOBA players. It was a
Is
really
that
special
Kiki
game,
Yomiyo?
especially for those who spent hundreds of hours playing their
Holy.
favorite gods. I can't help but nerd out when I think about the idea of thousands of gamers who would have otherwise never learned about any of these gods now knowing tons of gods from different cultures. And yeah, I don't want to end on too negative of a note, so I will say this. I wish Smite 2 the best, because without its success, we wouldn't have another third-person MOBA on the market, or any. And more variety and competition is good for gaming.
Shadow calling it quits here, leaving refreshed Wolverine and Narrel to finish off the remaining tank. My God, Shadow, that was legendary.
But I can't offer a lot of good words for Hi-Rez, who at this point has had their own clues immortalized on the series. I just hope all of those not in the executive suite in Georgia will land on their feet, because there's so much talent, or was so much talent, at the studio, and that can be seen
Who
in their
knows
games,
what's gonna happen.
just like Smite 1. Thanks for watching, and let me know in
It really kind of does feel like everything's just nosediving.